Violeta Parra, una gran cantautora chilena, nos recuerda
Violeta Parra, a great Chilean singer, reminds us that beasts are killers at all times, at all
en
moments.
todo instante. El imperialismo norteamericano
American imperialism has been characterized by destroying cities, towns,
pueblos, dar golpe de estados, masacrar,
carrying out coups and massacres as a custom, almost like a sport, of that dominant oligarchy in the northern country.
del norte. En el término de la Segunda
At the
Guerra
end of the Second World War, when the Axis countries had already surrendered, only Japan was missing.
Mundial, solamente faltaba Japón. Japón
Japan was practically in a very deep economic, military, and all kinds of crisis. It could not sustain a long-term war.
no podía sostener una guerra larga en el tiempo.
It was all predictable that Japan was simply going to surrender by normal military incursions.
Simplemente iba a rendirse. Sin embargo, el imperialismo norteamericano, para impedir
American imperialism, however, tried to prevent the Japanese people from making a change in their social system.
incluso de sistema social, que tomara los vientos que venían desde
A system which has learned lessons from the Asian continent, from deep China, which spoke of the birth of a popular republic led by Mao Zedong.
del nacimiento de una república popular dirigida por Mao Zedong. De la
From the
península
Korean peninsula, which was heroically invaded and enslaved by the Japanese, until the birth of a popular republic
que hablaban del nacimiento de una república popular
led by Kim Il-sung,
y de una Unión
and from a Soviet Union that was willing to send troops and specialists
tropas y especialistas,
to end the Japanese imperialism,
el imperialismo
which spoke of the possibility of making a new
que
Japan.
podían hacer un nuevo Japón.
The United States did not allow this to happen.
Estados Unidos entonces
The United States then used the atomic bomb of 20,000 megatons on Hiroshima.
atones en Hiroshima. De una,
More than 200,000 people died in an instant.
en un instante. Al final del
At the end of 1945, ending that year, there was talk of more than 300,000 dead. That was on August 6th.
Eso fue un 6 de agosto.
On August 9th, they dropped another similar bomb on the city of Nagasaki.
De esta manera,
In this way, they even broke with their friends who were also on the front of the Allies against the fascist Axis. There was also the Soviet Union.
estaba también la Unión Soviética. Y rompen con ellos
They broke with them and began to deepen the Cold War and threaten all the others,
y amenazan a todos los demás
since at that time the United States was the only possessor of the atomic bomb.
atómica. Y obligan a entrar en
This forced them to enter into a nuclear race to defend themselves.
Eso es Estados Unidos. Ni siquiera toma en cuenta los acuerdos.
That is, the United States does not even take into account the agreements with its allies who had, at that moment, rushed to bomb and massacre.
Japón nunca.
Japan never knew the true nature of what happened. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were surrounded by American soldiers, preventing information from being given to the Japanese population.
Llegar información a la población japonesa,
Even the American public, even photographs were censored. Today, very few photographs from that time exist.
sí existen personas que nacieron de
There are people who were born to parents who received radiation, had malformations and diseases of all kinds. These people are victims of the arrogance of imperialism and its criminal attitude.
Su actitud criminal. Las fieras son criminales en toda época.
Beasts are criminals at all times, said Violeta Parra. This is Black and White. I'm Eduardo Artes.
Soy Eduardo Artes. Hoy, desde Venezuela, estamos con Juan Carlos Monedero.
Today, we're with Juan Carlos Monedero, an academic and political scientist from Venezuela, to discuss something that is overwhelming world public opinion: the issue of atomic bombs.
Atómica. El inicio de esta pesadilla a partir
This nightmare began with the events and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where, as most of us know, there were hundreds of thousands of deaths almost instantly or in a very short period of time.
instantánea o en un transcurso de tiempo muy corto. Y que fue respuesta además
This attack was in fact against the people in a country that no longer had the capacity to the war, neither economically nor militarily. Japan was already destroyed. The attack was also an obvious threat to other countries that were fighting, such as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of China.
como es la República Democrática Popular de Corea y la República China.
But particularly, it was to prevent the entry of Soviet troops into Japan. We are with Juan Carlos Monedero. Welcome, Juan Carlos, to Black and White.
Monedero. Bienvenido, Juan Carlos, acá a Negro y Blanco por Hispan TV.
How are you? Greetings to everyone.
Un abrazo grande.
A big hug from here. The context in which the atomic bombing took place in Hiroshima and Nagasaki is little known, so it would be great if you could help us and give us some information about it.
A dar algunos elementos sobre aquello.
Bueno, es verdad que en la historia siempre la escriben los vencedores.
Well, it is true that history is always written by the victors. It is interesting to know that in 1945, if the world public opinion was asked about the reason for the victory over the Axis powers, the Soviet Union would appear to be the Allied country most responsible. However, today the tables have turned and it seems that it was Private Ryan who really liberated Europe. In the context of the Cold War, it started very soon. I mean, they wanted to open new fronts in Europe to relieve a little of the suffering that they were having, and Churchill wanted to open a front in Africa. He wanted to open a front in Italy, and the massacre of the Stalingrad. Well, that is the turning point of the World War. Russia paid an unaffordable price, and that was also what made Stalin see that the Allies were not as allies as it seemed. So the Cold War started at that time, and the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was above all a warning that was not necessary for Japan. It was actually a measure to call to attention, as it was well stated, to countries that were emerging, such as China and Korea. On the other hand, in Europe especially, there was the advance of the Red Army. It made sense because at least half of Europe was not going to fall under the American orbit. A Marshall Plan was already underway, which in some way wanted to subjugate the countries that accepted those loans. And so, in the division of the world at that time into a sphere of influence, it was the American will, and it was the Soviet determination, in this case, not to accept either the help of the Marshall Plan, nor to enter Berlin, nor to stop helping it with the emancipation of the Asian countries. This generated a bipolar world, where the United States found someone who confronted it, which was the Soviet Union. Well, there were two great models, one capitalist based on the liberal democracy, still based on the imperial model. This side enjoyed an enormous ideological penetration in the division of spheres of influence, apart from economic and military aspects. On the other side, there was the Soviet Union, which was intended to be based on an emancipatory socialist ideology, although they were not always able to achieve this.
Emancipatoria, aunque no siempre fueron capaces de lograrlo.
Muy bien. Mira, Sí, es así. Por ejemplo, países como China.
Very well. The point is that, for example, countries like China, and particularly the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, are always placed in the debate as countries which were very warlike and would use the atomic bomb to threaten. This is while the only country which has used it is the North American imperialism, which has threatened the people of the world with the atomic bomb. This is while, even from a legal constitutional point of view, North American legality does not allow its use without having been attacked.
El uso sin haber sido atacado.
Sí, porque la OTAN decidió convertirse.
Yes, because the organization, NATO decided to become an offensive and not a defensive organization, when they also assumed their expansion towards the east. Today we see its warmongering effects going on in Ukraine right now. It is Southern Europe after 30 years. This is the ultra-realistic will of the North American imperialism to bring NATO troops as close to China as possible. Therefore, it needed to place missiles in Ukraine to have that path open in some way. You're absolutely right. George Frost Kennan, the great theorist of containment, who, unlike the current leaders, was a guy who spoke perfect Russian, was a guy who knew Russian very well. As far as the containment of the nuclear bomb was concerned, what he was looking for was precisely that it would not take place to maintain only the doctrine of mutually assured destruction as an element. It's not like they can do any stupid thing and simply change it later. The problem is that the current leaders of the United States are prone to act unthoughtfully. Because today we have proliferating leaders, they're unbalanced leaders who can do any kind of barbarity. Look at the debates between Trump and Biden, who resigned. The point is that if I have to choose between these two gentlemen, I can't, because both of them scare me. Therefore, you're right that deep down, perhaps the most interesting thing is to understand that the two great sources of the North American hegemony after the Second World War, which was its economic and military preeminence, and the neoliberal model, both are bankrupt.
El modelo neoliberal están en quiebra, ambos, ¿no?
Así es.
That's right, Juan Carlos. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back here immediately with Black and White.
En Hispan TV. Tiró la bomba atómica en
The United States not only dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it had already bombed other cities before, with more than 100,000 dead.
filtrando toda información en relación a lo que allí había.
Leaking all information regarding what had happened there took 2 years. Even the Japanese population itself did not know much about what had happened, since the two countries were surrounded by American troops, so that the public was not aware of what had happened there.
¿No? De lo que allí había sucedido. Esta forma
This act was cruel and murderous because the truth is that it was only a matter of time before Japan would completely surrender. Japan did not have the capacity to confront it alone. It had already surrendered to Germany and, well, Italy. In short, there was nothing to do. We see such examples in today's world. The Zionist occupation of Palestine is similar. Some of the Zionist leaders have gone out of their way more than once.
Algunos de sus dirigentes se van de
bringing up ideas such as, why not use some tactical bombs to make Gaza disappear or to make Jordan disappear?
Desaparecer Gaza o hacer desaparecer Cisjordania, en fin.
Sí, sí, porque forma parte de la lógica.
Yes, because it is part of the logic that maybe professors can help the world to see the things that are a little hidden. In the modern Western condition, what we call modernity has always been deeply colonial, and this condition is in fact embedded in it at its core since the 15th century following the conquest of the North American imperialism. There has always been a will to consider the Western vote better than the rest of the world and to put the rest of the world at the service of the Western interests. As sociologist and Professor Boaventura de Sousa Santos says, they despise everything that is not culture, Western culture. That is why the westernized bastion that would supposedly be Israel is called the only democracy in the region. There have always been brutal attempts at the same time by the United States and Great Britain to prevent the development of democracy in West Asia. We should not ignore these facts. They actually did their best to push forward their Western culture in place of the culture of Persia. They choose to close their eyes to all the colonial behaviors and are still present, and now we're living the paradox that the European extreme right, which has always existed before, is now speaking out and supporting Israel and accusing those of us who are criticizing this genocide of being anti-Semitic. This is while, in fact, all Arab peoples would be Semites. Maybe you find this point a little bit irrelevant, but I think that, practically, almost the entire world is based on rules that the United States expresses in all its documents, but these rules have been broken. This world is based on rules that works to the extent that the United States and its allies spy on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, rules that allow them to enter the Mexican embassy in Quito, to kidnap a citizen, stealing Russia's assets that are in the banks, stealing Venezuela's gold, or stealing the entire Citgo gas station network. That is to say, they established sanctions unilaterally, as if they were the ones who have the right to establish sanctions or not. Any change is made based on your feelings about the Israeli genocide. In this whole crumbling world, there are unfortunately some crazy people who still believe that the nuclear bomb can be a solution to their problems. The world, as I said before, in this colonial world, which is part of the European and North American DNA, this idea of contempt for other cultures also creates this problem that in fact we're allowing people to come to power that have not experience and training. Businessmen or people that lack political experience and sanity simply come to power. Therefore, if the containment of nuclear fear served for half a century to stop any use of nuclear weapons, today the main fear has more to do with the inconsistency of many leaders who are in power. The truth is that I'm not optimistic about the future of the world with these people in power, unless, as is happening now, a global rearrangement of powers happen. For example, BRICS represents a very powerful part of the world population, and also very powerful countries act as a counterweight against the United States and help the progressive part of Europe that also exists in some way to renounce this war escalation, which, as I say, is closer to a catastrophe than any other times in history.
Que la que incluso hubo en otros momentos de la historia.
Bueno, lo sucedido en Hiroshima y Nagasaki.
Well, what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was, in any case, the breaking of everything that is called the international law.
Bueno, siempre los imperialistas lo han hecho, ¿no? Y lo mismo hoy día está.
Now, same thing is happening today in West Asia and also in other places in the world. How do you see this with regard to the previous experiences? How is that projected?
Aquello, digamos, tomando a partir de esa experiencia, ¿cómo se proyecta eso?
Es que después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial emerge un país.
After the Second World War, a country emerges that condemns the planet, as I said before. The behavior of the United States and its cousin, not Great Britain, is marked by brutality. But unlike the past, it is not limited to just bombings that destroyed cities and towns entirely. They also fulfill coups, genocides, and any sort of strategy to stop the development of socialist countries, preventing democracy from prospering, also in the Arab world. They encourage all types of political depositions contrary to democracy. They have the added advantage that now, once again, in a moment of crisis of the American model, well, sectors that are closely linked to power from the military structure are going to propose the use of war material in the world based on rules that do not exist. This means that we have to begin to assume that the only ones who defend liberal democracy are the progressive political forces of Western Europe, while the right, which is the one that benefits from the liberal democracy, is kicking it in the international arena, generating, as we said before, sanctions, invasions, coups, theft of property. But they're also kicking in the international spheres with manipulating public opinion, legal wars, media lies, etc. Before, I think that we have to assume that this model itself does not know the laws and does not observe any laws within the framework of the International Criminal Court. Generally, these laws are only applied to other countries. The United States does not abide by anything. That is why I say that if we really want a world based on rules and laws, and we need it, if we want the United Nations to work properly and it is necessary, I think that the rest of the countries of the world have to pressure and demand firmly that the laws should be the same for everyone and that there must not be no exceptions. Because if not, the United States is going to do what it did in Iraq again, displacing millions of people. There's no time to talk about the casualties and damages it left there. My point is that the American imperialism is actually removing democracy from the face of the earth and on the international scene. We must make the United States and its partners not only see but feel a strong confrontation against their destructive policies. I believe that this is the only solution, and that is why, as a European, I celebrate that the BRICS have proved to be successful, and they force also NATO and the European Union and the United States to behave in a truly democratic way, because if not, as I say, we are heading towards the precipice.
Vamos hacia el despeñadero, hacia el precipicio.
Así es. Para ir terminando, ¿cómo tú verías, digamos,
That is how it'll end, yes. As we witness that after the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, world countries entered a nuclear race.
que significó el expansionismo de lo que es la carrera nuclear?
Sí, esto es como cuando de repente en la calle ves a...
The situation is like, for example, you see some thugs on the street beating up a weaker person, and instead of helping the weak person, you join the thugs to beat him even harder. Well, as we said, the North American hegemony has subjected most of Europe to act in its benefit. It determined its behavior, or determined that the left-wing political forces could not enter the governments. It prevented their own weapons development. It linked the entire economic model to cheap oil, which was the responsibility of North American militarism to guarantee. All these had the element of force, the atomic bomb, which is what will determine the veto right in the United Nations Security Council. This has created a geopolitical construction based on the nuclear threat, whose force is that someone has used it, so it is no more a theoretical framework, but a reality, which has been proved in the past. So this is real, not imaginary, and for that reason, so many people also got angry with this recent film by Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer. It depicts the doubts of one of the scientists, but what about the barbarity of what was involved? It is as if we could analyze things outside of its political influence. See for yourself what kind of world it has built, a quiet, devastated one, with a brutal environmental threat, forced migrations and displacement of millions of people because of wars and violence and impossible living conditions. Well, such a world was actually born after what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
En referencia a Hiroshima y Nagasaki.
Así es, Juan Carlos. Esas son las consecuencias y este mundo tiene...
That's right, Juan Carlos. We see vividly the consequences today of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thank you very much for being with us on this program.
Juan Carlos, por haber estado con nosotros aquí en Negro y Blanco.
Que la gente...
People should not forget that millions of us took to the streets to report the US-Israeli massacre in Gaza. Now it is being broadcast, and yet the killings in Gaza still continue. So it seems that our actions are not enough. So there are reasons to worry.
Take care.
Saludos.